We are ready for another whisper reading. Yes, tonight, another whisper reading. Patrick, hey guys. Patrick, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I can't move. Welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome on in, everybody. Scratch. Thank you all for being here. I think I'm really going to whisper today. That is for sure. Can everybody hear me? All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am still reading The Dwarf's Spectacles and Other Fairy Tales, told by Max Nordau, and it was translated by Mary Safforrd. It was published in New York at the Macmillan Publishing Company in 1905. Trying to sit really still. We're going to continue this book. Tonight's first story is called The Little Glowworms. During the June night in the meadows in the edge of the forest was a pleasant wedding or a country fair. One second, technical difficulties. I had to make the letters bigger. All right. We'll start over. Here we go. The 6 little glowworms. During the June night, the meadows at the edge of the forest was as merry as a pleasant wedding or a country fair. The nightingales sang, the crickets chirped, and the plover drummed. The night wind whistled. Old May and young June bugs lay in their taverns in the grass. The bushes and the foliage of the trees and drank dew till they were full, and even the poor sober ladybug, which usually led no happy lives, were persuaded to share the lively meeting of the idlers. As soon as it grew dark, the 6 little glowworms that lived in the meadow crept out of their tiny room in the earth and lighted their lanterns so that the place was brightly illuminated by their shining bush white lights. So when the revelers broke up at as late an hour as possible, thanks to their living lamps, they found their way as easily and safely as possible. If it had been noonday, without striking against root and stone or falling into a mole burrow. Then, standing in front of the glowworms, they cheered them with their hoarse throats and sang this little verse. Little worm that kindly lights the reveler's steps in the dark night, as to his home he gropes his way, our thanks we pay, our thanks we pay. The little glowworms said nothing, only their light shined softly. They were indulgent in the harmless happiness of the revelers and enjoyed the merry life which surrounded them during this short festival season of the year. Not far from the meadow, where there was such gay, happy doings, stood an old castle with a lofty tower. Here lived an aristocratic owl family, numerous colonies of bats for servants. The mistress of the house, an owl of mature year, was a very learned lady who had one son whom she urged to study. But the young gentleman was an idler and a sluggard who would rather wander about than learn. Whenever he could, he stole away from his books and slipped out of the tower to rob nests, catch birds, or with the young nobleman from the owl's right in the neighborhood, joining in hunting hares and marmots. This troubled his mother greatly, and she fussed earnestly at him. The examination is close at hand, and you are not preparing yourself. Do you mean to disgrace me by failing? The young owl obstinately remained silent and looked sulky. Answer me, you unmannerly scapegoat, cried the owl angrily. What am I to do with you? All your ancestors are lights of learning and members of the academy. You alone wish to remain idle? You ignorant blockhead, are you not ashamed of yourself? It's not my fault, replied the owl nobleman defiantly. Not your fault? Asked the owl in astonishment. Whose fault is it then? Why, Mamma, cried the youth boldly, do have some consideration when I'm really to study. During the day, as a member of a respectable owl family, I must sleep. And at night, it's so dark in this confounded lumber room that I cannot see a line. I am nearsighted already. If I must strain my eyes over my books in this pitch-black darkness, I shall be blind entirely. What nonsense are you talking? Replied the owl sternly. We have lived here 100 years and more, and no one ever complained of our home before. They all found it comfortable. On moonlight nights it is almost too light, and when the moon doesn't shine, you have your roof cat, by whose eyes you can read easily. The youth remained obstinate. Pardon me, Mamma, he said defiantly. There are so few clear moonlight nights, and they don't count, and our cat's eyes may have been enough for our ancestors, but in our days of electricity, it is no light at all. Besides, we have so much more to learn now than you did in your old times. So either give me some decent light, or don't complain if I can't prepare for my examinations. And without waiting for his mother's answer, the rude youth vanished through the tower window. Sorry, guys. To amuse himself with his companions in the usual way, and let study alone. The owl called the oldest of her bats and said anxiously, There is no living with the young people any longer. Has my good-for-nothing son taken it into his head that it isn't light enough here, and therefore he cannot study? Foolish talk, Mrs. Professor, squeaked the bat. I know that just as well as you do, answered the owl. But I must not let him have the excuse for his idling. What shall we do to get better light for our lazy fellow? Our roof eats, began the bat. Isn't enough, replied the owl. Between ourselves, it really is a dim light, and I wonder whether our eyes are not constantly growing worse because Up to this time, we've been satisfied with our eats. With our cat's light. We must find something else. Sorry about that. What would it do to try glowworms, Miss Professor? They give a good, steady light, do not heat the head, and are not dangerous on account of fire. Clever idea, said the owl. Bring some here as soon as possible. The bat obediently flew away and hurried to the meadow on the edge of the forest where the spring festival was in full course. From all the treetops, bushes, and grass echoed the notes of fiddle, the sound of flutes, and merry drinking songs. Everywhere was dancing, playing, drinking, and little glowworms with quiet pleasure held the light for these happy doings. Without troubling herself in the least about the company, the owl's faithful servant seized one of the glowworms with her teeth and carried it in a swift flight to the tower where she put it in a beam. It was trembling in every limb with fright, and in its terror it almost let its lantern glow. The owl looked at the little creature closely and said discontentedly, This light, too, is not enough. No, Mrs. Professor, replied the bat. It shone far more brightly in the meadow outside. These glowworms are weird creatures. Alone they are not good for much, but there must be several of them together, and the rascals want to outshine one another. Each try to do his best, and the result is something very acceptable. Then get several, ordered the owl. The bat called her relatives. They went to the meadow together and brought away another 5 glowworms. When all 6 sat side by side on the beam in the tower, they were so glad that no harm had happened to them and that they were together again, they quickly forgot their fright and let their lanterns shine with full brilliancy. The walls of the tower chamber glittered and sparkled as if it were hung with silver cloth and adored for a royal festival. It was a very beautiful sight, which pleased even the bat, though usually she cared little for wealth and magnificence. Wonderfully pretty, she said, but too dazzling. I could not bear it long. Nor I either, answered the owl. But what can I do? The young folks will have it so. The 6 little glowworms shone continuously until the approach of dawn. Then they turned off their lights, crept close to one another on the beam, and fell asleep, tired out, and dreamt of the merry fair from which they had been stolen to serve in the owl's tower. Very well, you idler, she muttered before she went to her bed. You shall have a surprise tonight. In fact, when the darkness came, the owl went to her lion bed and shouted into his ears, Get up, you sluggard, up with you, quick and get to work. The young owl opened his eyes, but instantly shut them again to escape the glare which met him. The 6 little glowworms had lighted their lanterns and were shining as brightly as they could. Now you can no longer tell me you cannot see plainly enough, the owl went on. I have given you a light which will make your eyes water. Now bring your books and study steadily. The young owl was obligated to get up, whether he liked it or not. He made his toilet, ate something, and sat down with his books. But he had no love for studying and only waited until his mother accompanied by 2 young bats, flew away to attend to some business. Then he went quickly to the little glowworms and said in a subdued voice, yet very impressively, "You vagabond lantern bearers, what do you want here? Who sent for you? If you don't put out your worthless eye spoilers, I'll break your bones for you." The little glowworms were terrified and lowered their lights almost entirely, so that only glimmered very faintly. But the bat, who in the corner had seen and heard all this, shout out hissing, "Just you wait, sir. I'll tell your mother about this, and you glowworms will turn up your lights again at once, or I'll have to deal with me." The little glowworms did not know what to do. The young owl threatened their lives if they shone, and the bat if they put their lights out. But they understood that the young owl had more authority here than the bat, and the bravest of them summoned courage to say to him, as he stood before them with angry eyes and ruffled feathers, "My young lord, we should be very glad to obey you if only we could. We did not come here voluntarily. Your servants dragged us by force from our home and family. We would like nothing better than to return to our own people. But how are we going to get out of this terribly high tower and reach the earth? We can never do it alone. Help us, my young lord, and we will be grateful to give you all our lives." The young owl was a rough fellow, yet he had a kind heart. He pitied the frightened glowworms and did not want to throw them out of the tower window. Besides, he was afraid of his mother, who would certainly ask where they were. He drove the old bat rudely back to her corner and said softly to the trembling little glowworms, "Now, pay attention to me. When my mother comes home, summons up your courage and declares, 'Strike.' My mamma is a little severe in her language, but she will do you no harm. She doesn't eat things like you. I hope she will drive you away, and then I will carry you home." Things happened just as the sly fellow had planned. When the owl came back, she found the room perfectly dark, and 6 little glowworms were visible only as faint bluish sparks. "What does this mean?" shrieked the owl angrily. The bat was rushing out of her corner, but the young owl flew to her side and whispered fiercely, "Hold your tongue, or it'll cost your life." Then hurried back to the glowworms, he hissed, "Go on now, be brave." The glowworms, which had spoken before, again began, "Pardon us, Baroness, we cannot shine." "Why not, you lazy rebel?" cried the owl fiercely. "Because we get nothing to eat and drink," replied the glowworms boldly. Said the owl, rather perplexed. She had not thought of that before, and could not deny that the glowworms was right. "What do you want?" "4 meals a day. At each meal, 12 fat plant lice and a pint of fresh dew. That's what we're used to. And then a soft moss bed with time in the pillows and permission to go out twice a week, or we can do nothing." "You shall be choked first, you gluttons," cried the owl in her greatest rage. "Here, bat, break these blockheads' necks, eat them all." "Out with your lights," whispered the young owl to them quickly, while the bat was flying as fast as possible to obey the mistress' orders. The little glowworms instantly put out their lanterns and were now perfectly invisible in the dark room, so that even a sharper-sighted creature than a half-blind bat could not have found them. "Quick! Sit on my claw, each one of my toes," said the young owl very softly. They crawled and crept as fast as they could upon the owl's feet, which he had placed on the beam, and when he felt that they were all clinging fast with their little thin, weak legs, he sailed noiselessly out of the window. Outside in the open air, when they knew that they were out of danger, all the glowworms lighted their lanterns and shone with all their power, so that the young owl, and in his flight, looked like a wonderful shining constellation. On reaching the meadow at the edge of the forest, the rough fellow shook his traveling companions from his claws with a sudden movement, because it was so disagreeable to him to feel their little thin legs on his toes, and he went off without any word of farewell. The glowworms fell down into the ground from a considerable distance and were somewhat bruised, but the pleasure of being again at home with their relatives was greater than the pain. They were greeted with universal rejoicing, for it had been very dull in the meadow since the bats had carried away their living lanterns. The night festival had been interrupted. All the revelers wanted to hurry home, and in doing so had fallen into pools and were drowned. Others had stumbled over roots and stones and broken their legs or even their necks. Cries of pains and groans had followed the merry songs. When the revelers now had their usual light once more, the fiddlers and flutes sounded happily. Old and young, May and June beetles, crickets, grasshoppers, and even the sober ladybugs danced around the 6 little glowworms, singing joyfully. How have we missed your shining spark when we wandered through the nights so dark? We've broken limbs on paths astray. We've drowned in pools beside the way. But now we have you here once more. Hurrah, 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 we roar. After this trial, the owl gave up her effort to make her son a learned man. She let him become a hunter, and in this career, for which he had an inclination and talent, he advanced so far that his mother, after all, was satisfied with him. Welcome in. Welcome to the reading. Thank you, Patrick. I hope I'm not blinking. Oh, sorry. If I move at all, I blink. So I'm hoping I'm not blinking too much. Hi, Lucy. Welcome in. Welcome in. I'm going to try to move it just a little bit closer. Let's see. Surprise. Maybe I won't blink as much when it's a little closer. Trying to figure all this technology out. All right, Lucy, good to see you. Vija, welcome, welcome. I am out of town and the internet is iffy at best. I will be returning everybody's love. Sorry, I'm sitting on my hair. Just as soon as I get home. I think for the next story, I'm going to turn the camera a little bit so it's not blinking. I don't know. Okay, I'll watch it. next story. These stories in this book are long, aren't they? I hope everybody can hear me okay. Give me a thumbs up if you can. Or Lucy, you can keep laughing at me. That's fine, babe. All right. The next story is called The Dwarf's Spectacle. So, Michael was a good lad. He was the only son of a widow who, after her husband's early death, was left alone with him and 2 little girls. By great sacrifices, she had brought up our 3 children, kept them warm and clean, and sent them to school and educated them. Michael, from his 10th year, had faithfully helped her. At first he had picked up dung on the highway and caught cockafurs, for which the parish paid him in a few pennies a quart. Then he had tended sheep and helped to gather fruit at harvest time. When he was 16, he went into the farmer's service, and from that hour he not only supported himself, but also aided his mother and sisters. Several years after both of the girls married, one the village carpenter, the other the schoolmaster, for in spite of their poverty they were known and respected by all of the villagers for their modesty, their beauty, and their clever brains. One Sunday, soon after his younger sister's marriage, Michael went to his mother and said, "Mother, I am 21 years old, tall and strong, and skillful in all farm work. Without praising myself, there is not a farmhand for 10 miles who can make a straighter furrow or build as good as a hayrick as I do, to say nothing of mowing, threshing, and cattle tending." "I know that, my boy," replied the widow, somewhat surprised by his speech. "But why do you tell me this?" "Because I have determined to see a little of the world. I want to go on my travels." "Stay in the country and support yourself honestly," warned Mother. "I can accomplish nothing here," Michael answered. "In foreign countries I shall learn all sorts of things, save something, and if I have good luck in time, I shall rule as owner of my own farm." "That would be fine, surely," murmured Mother, "but it is not easy." "Nothing in this world is easy, at least for people like us," said Michael. "But I can try hard things too. I have the bones for it." The mother could not help admitting that he was right, though it was hard for her to part from her good son. In order to not be alone, she moved into the house of her daughter, the carpenter's wife. Michael promised always to send her money whenever he had any to spare. His master, the farmer, had given him 3 gold coins, his brother-in-law, the school teacher, a knapsack and a hymn book, and his brother-in-law, the carpenter, a stout knotted stick, and his mother, her blessing to take with him. Thus equipped, after a touching leave-taking with his family, he left the village one sunny autumn morning and set forth into the world. After some time, a fellow joined him on the highway, and when they had exchanged greetings, asked, "Where did you come from? Where are you going? What country do you belong? What is your trade, and what is your name?" Michael answered frankly, only he could not say where he should go. He would follow his nose, he thought, and it would lead him somewhere. The fellow laughed and replied, "Join me then. I am a better guide than your nose. I am a printer, have wandered the world, and know something about nearly everything that comes from education, my dear fellow. One learns more behind the compositioner's case than behind the ox plow." "All due respect your education," said Michael, raising his eyebrow, "but I'm content with the plow. I can always stand beside your case without shame." "You're right, brother," replied the printer. "The man who will have nothing said against his trade is a fine fellow. Have you been to the city yet?" "No," said Michael. "That's fine," cried the printer. "I'm at home in the city and will show you everything. You are lucky to have fallen in with me, for in town one must open one's eyes and keep sharp watch, unless one wants to be cheated at every corner. Tell me, brother, have you any money? For in the city you must pay well. There is nothing for nothing." Michael unsuspiciously took out 3 gold coins from his pocket and showed them to the printer. The other hastily pulled out a few silver pieces and dirty scraps of paper and held them before Michael's face for a moment and said, "This is my money, you see. I'm richer than you." The truth was that Michael had seen nothing distinctly, for he had no skill at counting money. "Give me your yellow, boy," the printer went on. "We will put our cash together and make one purse. Then you will be sure that none of the city thieves will rob you." This suited Michael. He gave his 3 gold coins to the printer, and the two walked on, talking merrily until they reached the city. Going into a tavern, they drank what was good and dear. In the afternoon, the printer showed Michael the sights of the city, and the evening they had a fine meal of beer and sausage. And when it grew late, the printer said, "Now we'll stop work. I will take a separate room. You suppose you're an early riser. I like to stay a long time in bed if I'm not obliged to get up. You would wake me if we slept in the same room. So good night, brother Michael." The next morning, according to his habit, Michael rose with the roosters, went to the coffee room, and said to the tavern keeper who was there, "I suppose my companion is still in bed." "Why, no," replied the host. "He is earlier than you. He started half an hour ago and left his regards for you." "What?" cried Michael. "He's gone." "Yes, indeed, bag and baggage," answered the tavern keeper. "But my money!" shrieked Michael, turning pale. The tavern keeper knew nothing about it, but Michael told him how he had given his gold to the printer, and the innkeeper grew almost as angry at his story. "What a simpleton you are!" he exclaimed. "It serves you right. You are more stupid than the newborn calf. You have paid your apprentice money. At least it'll be a warning for you in the future. But you can't stay here if you have no money. I give nothing on credit." Michael was obliged to pack his knapsack and leave. As he wandered sorrowfully along the highway, he saw in the distance a pear tree. And it was full of ripe fruit, at whose foot sat a man on the ground with his back resting against the trunk, smacking his lips over the juicy pears, a whole heap of which he piled beside him. The man was an ill-looking fellow. He was barefooted, very ragged, uncombed and unwashed, but Michael's stomach was complaining, his mouth watered, and he involuntarily stepped in front of him. "Will you join me?" asked the barefooted fellow, grinning. Gladly, for I have nothing to eat today, replied Michael, taking several pears. Where are you from, and what are you doing? Asked the shabby fellow. Michael told him frankly of his unfortunate adventure with the printer, who had basically robbed him, and complained that he did not know how he was going to get on without money. The tramp had picked up his ears at Michael's story and eyed him sharply with a side glance. Money lost is nothing lost, he said, when his other had finished. It so happens that we two can now become equally rich. Do you see the poplar tree yonder? He pointed to a very tall tree which grew a few steps down the road. Certainly. What is it? Do you see the magpie's nest high in the boughs? Michael searched for a while with his eyes. Then he said, Yes, I see it too. Well, then the magpie has stolen a large gold chain set with diamonds somewhere. I saw her just now as she carried the jewels to a nest. It is lying there still. I wanted to climb up at once and take it away, but I have rheumatism in all my bones from sleeping on the ground so many nights. I can't imagine climbing, but it will be a child's play for you. So up with you at once and fetch the treasure of the nest. Child's play, that's saying a great deal, muttered Michael, measuring with his eyes the height of the tree. And besides, the chain doesn't belong to us. We must give it back to the owner. Oh, of course, cried the tramp. Do I look like a thief? But at any rate, we can demand a reward, and that's something. Michael hesitated no longer. He took out his back knapsack and rested his stick against the pear tree and was beginning to climb the poplar. Hold on, said the tramp. That won't do. You must take off your coat and boots too, or you'll never get to the top. Michael knew this was true. He pulled off his handsome new boots and removed his nice cloth coat, folded them neatly according to his custom, laid them both beside his knapsack, and said, Take good care of them for me. I have nothing else in the world. Depend upon it, brother, depend upon it, cried the barefoot tramp, rubbing his dirty hands together with a grin. Michael began to climb the tall poplar. He was strong and skillful, but it was a hard piece of work. At last, however, he reached the nest, peering in with the greatest curiosity. There were 4 fledgling magpies, which made a great outcry, flapping their wings violently, and pecked his hand with their yellow beaks. As for the necklace, but there was no sign of a gold chain. He found a safe seat in the fork of the branch and called down, Hello! You must have dreamed about the gold chain. There is nothing here but downy feathers, no necklace. As he received no answer, he parted the branches and looked down. To his horror, he saw that the tramp had disappeared, and with him his knapsack, staff, boots, and coat. Gazing into the distance, he discovered, with all the stolen clothes, on running along the road far away. Stop, thief! Shouted Michael at the top of his lungs, slipping and jumping down the tree as fast that he ran the risk of breaking his neck. But no living soul was in sight. No one heard his call for help. No one stopped the flying thief. And it was useless to follow him, for he had a long head start, and a bend in the road soon hid him from Michael. There stood poor Michael, now barefoot in his shirt sleeves, with nothing left, not even the cane and hymn book which his brother-in-law had given him, or the underclothes which his mother had packed in the knapsack. He did not know what to do. Should he go on, or simply turn back and again enter the service of his master, the farmer? But he was much too ashamed to go home at such a plight, after starting out into the world with such proud hopes. So he was determined to try to get work as he was. He walked sadly on until he came to a broad and tolerably swift stream, across which was a ford. When he went down the bank and was preparing to roll up his trousers and step into the water, he suddenly heard loud weeping, as if from a child. He looked around, and in his surprise he saw nothing, yet the crying did not stop, and Michael had to be too kind-hearted not to wish to find the cause of the trouble. He followed the sound, which seemed to come from a thick clump of willows, and after some searching discovered a weird little man with a gray beard who was trying to hide from him the moss. Taking up the tiny creature carefully, that he did not hurt it, he said kindly, "Don't be afraid. I will do you no harm. Tell me, whatever can I help you?" The little man hesitantly took from a case which hung on his back a pair of horn spectacles with round blue glasses, as big as he was himself, held them before his eyes, for he could not put them on because his nose was far too small, and gazed at Michael intently. The examination seemed to satisfy him. He folded up the spectacles, put them carefully back into the case again, and said in his weak little voice, "I must cross the river, and I cannot, for it is too deep." Michael's curiosity was roused, and he asked, "What have you to seek on the other side?" "It would be too long a story to tell you," replied the little man. "In a few words, I can give only this. I belong to a race of dwarves, which until now lived in this neighborhood. But men have grown too wicked. We cannot stay here any longer. My people have gone and taken their boat with them. I was delayed because I wanted to help a poor woman who had been kind to me and gather some healing herbs. They left me behind all alone, and now I don't know what will become of me." "It seems to me," said Michael, "that your dwarf brothers are at least as wicked as men, since they did not trouble themselves about with you." "It is my own fault," wailed the dwarf. "A whole nation cannot wait for one person." "Shall I carry you across the water?" asked Michael. "Ah, if only you would do that, then I should be saved, for on the other side I should overtake my people." "Come on then, little fellow," said Michael, rolled up his trousers above his knees, took the dwarf in hand, waded carefully through the roaring river, and when he had reached the opposite bank, he asked the little man, "Shall I carry you farther? You are not too heavy." "No," replied the dwarf hastily. "Just put me on the ground. I can find my way alone now." Michael obeyed the dwarf's wish. The little fellow took from his back the case with the spectacles, laid it on Michael's hand, and said, "I want to show you my gratitude. We dwarfs have no money, but I will give you these spectacles. When you put them on, you can read the thoughts of men in their head. You already know how useful that is. Michael hesitated to accept such a gift. You will need them yourself, he said. Take them, replied the dwarf. We're going to a distant country where we shall live among ourselves. We dwarfs say what we think and think what we say. There shall no longer be need for the spectacles for reading thoughts. I thank you. Farewell. Before Michael knew it, the dwarf had vanished, and Michael, who would gladly have talked with him a little longer, searched for him in vain. So he put on the blue spectacles in his pocket and continued his way in a sorrowful mood. After walking some time, he came to a field of turnips, separate from the road by a fence. Before the fence, several men who looked like field laborers were standing, and behind it a stout man, with the perspiration streaming down his face, was digging up the turnips. The workman appeared to be laughing at the fat fellow, and the fat fellow was toiling as if he wanted to vent his rage on the earth. Michael, curious to see what was going on, stopped, and the fat man called, Hello, do you want to earn a penny instead of staring at those gaping idlers? Then come, there's work enough here for every man. Michael noticed the laborers looked at him angrily, and he thought, something is wrong here. It occurred to him that it was a good chance to try the dwarf's spectacles, and he put them on his nose. The glasses were scarcely before his eyes when he was in the heads of the people, appeared to become so transparent as crystal, and he could read their thoughts as plainly as in a book of clear, large type. In the fat man's head he read, You seem to be a strong fellow and very poor. Come work for me. I shall pay you as little as possible. And this gang which refuses to work for my wages and leave me in a lurch in the middle of the harvest will pull long faces. The rascals will probably break your bones because you're spoiling their game. But that's your affair, not mine. Michael was troubled and turned to the laborers who were closing around him, threatening. There he read, What? Does a tramp like you mean to work cheaper here and serve the rich skinflint for a song? We have brought him to a point where he would be obligated to add a little, and now you cross our plans and help the rich extortioner against us? Michael knew enough. If there was plenty of work here for everybody, he said to the fat man, then these people would have more right to it than I. With these words, he turned to go. Idler! Shouted the fat man furiously. What? Michael answered. You want to rob me of my day's work, yet you call me an idler? For shame, you penny squeezer. The laborer burst into a loud laugh, and one held out his hand to him. Clasp hands, you are a good fellow. Come and drink a glass of beer with us. Willingly, replied Michael, as they all left the fat man standing in his turnip field. They went on together until they came to an inn by the roadside, which they entered. On the way, they told him that they were engaged in a struggle about wages with the fat man, who was the richest landowner in the neighborhood, and Michael answered that he needed the day's wages greatly, but he would not take bread out of their mouths. They now made him tell them how it happened that he was wandering about the world barefoot and in his shirt sleeve, and pitied him for having been twice outwitted by rascals. So they offered to get him a coat and boots on credit and obtain work in the neighborhood. Michael was greatly delighted over it, the more so as he saw through the blue spectacles that their thoughts were sincere and they honesty by him. In the town, the laborers ordered food and drink to be set before Michael and clothed him out of the landlord's chest and trunks so that he no longer looked like a tramp. When he was fitted out and had eaten, he glanced around the room. In the corner, he saw a table, 3 fellows who sat there silently, pledging each other from time to time in the large glasses of brandy. One had squint eyes, the second a nose twisted completely to one side, and the third was disfigured by a hair's lip. They looked so evil that Michael was horrified and quickly seized the dwarf's spectacles. He was curious what kind of thoughts lurked behind such ugly faces. What he read in their heads made him shudder. They were all 3 thinking of nothing except that night they would break into the old castle near the inn, murder the old countess, her young daughter, unalive, and daughter and 2 maidservants who were living there alone, while the old count was in attendance at court, and steal their gold and silver. Behind these thoughts, which he saw with terrible distinctness, he read others a little less clearly. The squint-eyed man was imagining how he would hurt the woman with his dagger while they knelt before him begging for mercy. The crooked-nosed man fancied he'd have a pile of gold in which he was plunged his blood-soaked hands. The hare-lipped man meant to attack his 2 comrades in their sleep after the crime had been committed, unalive them, and rob them of their shared booty. Michael asked himself in horror what he could do to prevent this crime and deliver the wicked fellows to punishment. Tell the laborers what he read in the heads of the 3 monsters. They would not believe him and perhaps think he was crazy. Go to the police and denounce the scoundrel? But how could he prove what they meant to do? If they denied it, he would be standing there like a simpleton, and the police perhaps would take him for a rascal who wanted to fool them. After thinking over the matter for a long time, it seemed to him that he could do nothing except deal with the 3 rogues alone. He agreed to meet the laborers the next morning at the same inn, to go with them to a place to work. He took leave of them and hurried off in the direction that was supposed the castle stood. After questioning all the shepherds, the market women he met on the way, he would at last reach the thick forest, and there in the clearing was an old castle, with its solid walls and small windows. He knocked at the heavy oak door until it slowly opened in a little, and in the crack appeared an aged maidservant who asked what he wanted. He begged to see the countess, for whom he had an important message, but was kept waiting a long while outside the door. But at last the maid came back and sulkily invited him in to follow her. Michael went in behind her into the little tower room where the old countess received him. Beside her sat her daughter, a young girl, beautiful as an angel, whose blue eyes were as friendly as the bright day. Michael felt his heart grow warm, as if sunbeams had entered it, and he could not make up his mind to frighten this lovely creature by his story. He told the countess that he must speak to her alone, and after a little hesitancy, she sent her daughter and the servant out and ordered Michael to deliver his message at once. Your ladyship, 3 scoundrels intend to attack your castle tonight, unalive you, and steal your treasure. Seeing her turn pale, he added quickly, have no fear, I will remain to defend you And so long as I have a drop of blood in my body, no one shall harm you or a hair on your head. 1 against 3, sighed the Countess anxiously. I would fight with 5 if I only had weapons. There is no lack of arms here, said the Countess. But would it not be wiser for us to fly to the city at once? The road is long and is almost dark, and the forest is not safe. Besides, your flight would not prevent the robbery of the castle. The Countess saw this. She was naturally a brave woman, and Michael's presence somewhat soothed her. She gave him from her husband's some weapons, and ordered her a dainty supper to be served to him, sent her daughter and the 2 maids to bed early, and then kept watch with him in the castle hall. No persuasion from Michael could induce her to go into the tower and protect herself behind locks and bolts. If I am warned, I can defend myself, she said firmly, and so it was settled. Just before midnight, the Countess and Michael, who were listening behind the oak door, heard soft, stealing steps approaching and whispering voices consulting about the best way to break into the castle. Various plans were refused, and at last they agreed that the most nimble robber should climb and project stones to a window on the 2nd story, fasten a rope wound about his waist to the crossbars, and drag the others up. Now we have the rascals, Michael whispered to the Countess, and ran before her up the stairs into the room whose window the scoundrel meant to enter. With his gun ready to fire, he waited in the dark until a head appeared above the sill, and then pressed the trigger. A flash, a report, a shriek, a fall followed. In an instant, the 2 robbers who had remained below saw with terror their comrade drop at their feet and turn to fly. Michael and the Countess fired at the same time and saw them both fall. Hooray! Shouted Michael joyously, and without listening to the Countess' warnings, he ran down the stairs, seized the lantern, unbolted the door, and rushed out. At the foot of the castle wall, he saw a man with a crooked nose lying with a broken skull, and one with the hare lip had a bleeding wound in his breast. The squint-eye man was not unalived. He had recovered. He had only received a bullet in the leg and had fallen, but rose again and was limping off. Michael pursued him like the wind, but the vagabond suddenly turned and struck fiercely at him. With a knife, Michael fired the pistol which stretched the man onto the grass. Then he too, with the blade in his breast, fell to the earth. Meanwhile, the Countess' daughter and 2 maids rose from their sleep by the firing, came hurriedly down. The Countess called to them, but the danger was over, and all 4 carried the wounded Michael into the castle without heeding the 3 ruffians who lay unalived or senseless. Michael, too, became unconscious after the 4 women had laid him on the couch. When he came to himself again, yet many hours had passed since the adventures of the night. The maid had brought back a doctor from the city at dawn, and now the Count, who had been informed by a messenger of what had happened, also arrived. Michael heard the doctor tell the Count that he would recover, and the Countess speak with the highest praise of his courage, to which they all owed their lives. He wanted to rise himself and say that he did not deserve so much honor, but they all ordered him in the same breath to say nothing and to keep quiet. It was many days before Michael's wound healed. The Countess and her daughter nursed him tenderly, and he was always happy whenever he saw the lovely girl beside his bed. His eyes rested constantly upon her, and when they met her, a faint flush mounted into her cheeks. He longed to know what had passed through her little head and asked for his blue spectacles. The Countess and her daughter wondered at his desire and wished to know what use he could have for the spectacles in a darkened sick room, but he only repeated the request until they yielded and brought the spectacles. He hastily seized them and put them on with trembling hands, and gazed with all his soul at the white brow of the young Countess. He read, "Why does he stare at me so strangely? Has the poor young fellow gone crazy?" And beyond were many half distinct thoughts, which were something like, "That would be a great pity, for he is such a dear, brave fellow, and I am so fond of him, that I wish he would stay here with me till the end of my life." When he had read this, tears filled his eyes. He took off the glasses, which were dimmed, and did not utter a word. But when the Countess left them alone with her daughter, he suddenly seized the lovely girl's hand and said in a trembling voice, "Beautiful Countess, I am only a peasant boy, but I love you very, very dearly, and I know that you love me too. So I dare to ask you, will you be my wife?" "Yes, I will," she answered swiftly, sinking into his arms. So the Countess found the young couple when she entered. At first she was very angry and would not consent to have her only daughter marry a peasant lad. But the young lady said, "I will have him or no one, and if you will not let me marry him, it will break my heart." Then, whether willing or not, the mother was obliged to consent, and even begged the Count to give his blessing to the union. Michael was almost well, so he was again allowed to talk to the Count, and the Count inquired how he had discovered the plans for the robbery. Two of whom were unalived and buried, and the third lay wounded in prison. Michael did not wish to have any secrets from his future father-in-law, so he told him about meeting the dwarf, who had given him the blue spectacles, and what power these spectacles possessed. The Count wanted to try their wonderful magic himself, and was convinced that Michael had not attempted to deceive him. "You must show the dwarf spectacles to the king," said the Count. When Michael was allowed to rise, he took him to court with him and presented them to the king, who heard the story with amazement. He too put on the spectacles and looked a long while at the courtiers who surrounded his throne. "Your most gracious majesty, I will gladly give you the dwarf spectacles if you will accept them from me." The king slowly shook his head and took them off and returned them to Michael. "No," he said, "I do not want them. I would rather not be compelled to read the thoughts of men. It does not give happiness. I will even try to forget what I have read. I will appoint you chief judge of my kingdom. Then you can apply the dwarf spectacles to a useful purpose." Michael was now a person of importance, whom even the Count would willingly accept for a son-in-law. He brought his mother from the carpenter's house in the village, married the young, beautiful Countess, moved into the splendid palace in the capital, and performed his duties as Chief Justice with the blue spectacles on his nose. Nobody among the people knew their power, but soon all trembled before it. For though through them Michael read the truth in the heads of the most hardened criminals, the most skillful sharpers, no lie could stand before him, no injustice could remain concealed, no innocent person was condemned, and no guilty one escaped punishment. Henceforth, law and justice reigned through the kingdom. Michael was feared by the bad, honored by the good, and praised by all as the wisest man in the whole country. And so it remained until the end of his life. So with these stories being so long, that is the end of our Whisper Reading ASMR tonight. We will have more on Thursday. Thank you for coming in. Thank you. Stitch by Mimuna, Ritzwa, and Marak. Thank you. I have to sit very slow or my backdrop moves around. Thank you, guys. So until next time, I am going to say goodbye for now. I'll be visiting as soon as I get home.